Hi there. Nice to meet you all again. This is episode number 6 of our conversations on classical music. I'm Andreas, and in Philadelphia, I'm joined by David. And we're, this time switching to a more somber note, maybe, because actually, as you know, the world has somehow turned less peaceful and more aggressive the last days, and that's also something we want to integrate in this conversation. David.
Yeah, so we were about to record our next episode exploring concerti, and after some pause we decided to pivot and do an episode entitled Elegies in Music for Our Times, which I think it's both more appropriate and comforting, really. And we have a really nice selection of music for you. So an elegy is defined as a poem or musical composition of serious reflection, typically a lament for the death, but sometimes used as an expression of somber melancholy. And you'll see exactly what we mean.
Yes. Sorry, but what I always find very comforting indeed, as you mentioned, is that it's almost like a miracle for me, at least. I don't know what you're experiencing, but if I'm in a sad or somber or even depressive mode, then listening to music, even though the music might be as somber and as sad, brings actually some relief. No, the music, even sad music, takes away, for me at least, some of my own sadness, which is actually miraculous in a way.
No question. I have my favorite pieces when I'm in a bad mood. I put them on over and over again, and it's very comforting.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna start with compositions by Sir Edward Elgar, which is a composer that I actually like a lot. And we're going to feature 3 of his compositions, so that we're going to focus more on him than anybody else. And I find him an interesting character. There are a lot of contradictions in his persona, which are very interesting. So on the one hand, Elgar is widely regarded as the quintessential English composer. Obviously he was knighted, and his music, particularly his grand pieces, the Enigma variations, and particularly the variation called Nimrod, and his Pomp and Circumstance marches, are iconic in English, in the English repertoire. And in fact, one of his marches was converted into a vocal piece called Land of Hope and Glory, which is regarded, together with, I guess, the hymn Jerusalem, as kind of the unofficial national anthem of England, or the alternative national anthem of England. That's how important it is. And everybody outside of England will probably recognize it because it's become music de rigueur in all sorts of graduations. So I'm sure you listen to it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But in spite of him being kind of this iconic figure, he was actually very much an outsider, essentially, in his own country. Right? He was most of his career, he was not recognized at all. He was completely overlooked. His accolades came late in life. He came from a working class family. He didn't go to the right colleges or universities. Didn't get the right education for the highly status-oriented British society of the 19th century. He was a devout Catholic in a Protestant country, and he always felt kind of like he didn't belong really in at least in those circles of the British society. He married a piano student of his who was actually the daughter of a knighted officer, so somebody from the higher classes. She was several years his elder, and of course Protestant. And when she told her parents that she was planning to marry Elgar, they were so horrified that they literally disinherited him. So there are interesting contradictions, and we're going to focus on a few of his most kind of sentimental pieces, which are gorgeous. And we're going to start with the Elegy for Strings, for no other reason than it's the only one with the name Elegy in the title.
Yeah.
So listen to that. The second piece that we want to showcase is another kind of beautiful piece called Sospiri. Sospiri in Italian means sides.
Sides, yeah.
Sides, right. And it's really an elegy in everything but the title. It was believed to have been written in memory of his very good friend August Jaeger, who was actually the subject of the Nimrod variation.
Of the Nimrod, exactly.
So he's a very famous guy in musical history without ever being a musician, I guess.
I think he was a music publisher.
He was, that's right, he was a publisher, So it's a gorgeous piece, and here's the orchestral version of it. before you listen to it, you may recall that I said the orchestral version. And I mentioned that specifically because the piece was actually originally written for violin and piano. Mm-hmm. And it was meant to be kind of a complementary piece to Salute d'Amour. And so we have for you a gorgeous performance of the original intended violin and piano version of Suspiro. And now for the last piece. So the last piece we want to feature is his cello concerto.
The most famous one, maybe. Even I mean, you mentioned the pomp and circumstances and the enigma, but I mean the cello concerto certainly is on par with those two. Mm-hmm.
Yes, but only relatively lately, right? So what's interesting about the cello concerto is that, like his career, it was widely dismissed at the beginning and for many years. And it really only got rediscovered or revived through this seminal recording of that concerto by the then very young Jacqueline
Dupre. No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we're talking about the 60s, right? So really until the 1960s.
Yeah, that's true. It laid dormant, so to say. It had to be
now it's considered one of the greatest concertos of all time. And Jacqueline Dupre, who tragically died very young, is considered one of the greatest cellists of all time.
And even came about this anecdote, that Mstislav Rostropovich, I mean, to classic lovers, a household name interpreter, he is reported to have said, after having heard Jacqueline Dupre's recording, that he would cancel the concerto, the Elgar concerto, or take the concerto out of his repertoire. So it was really, even for peers, for world famous peers, it was an amazing achievement, this interpretation by Jacqueline Dupre.
Right. The reason we picked it is because it's widely associated with kind of it's widely regarded as conveying kind of the somber mood and mourning and despair resulting from the terrible toll of World War I. And just listen to the opening and see if you agree with us.
picked a second composer whose life and status in some way is similar to Elgar's, Gabriel Fauré. You may have heard of him. He's a French composer, also approximately lived in the same period as Elgar did, so mid-19th century to first quarter of 20th century. And he also came from very modest origins in the south of France, and then later moved with his family to Paris. I think the only important and most important actually difference to Elgar is that Gabriel Fauré had a very important and really dedicated mentor, which was Camille Saint-Saëns. Later on in his life, he became even director of the Paris Conservatory, and so managed it very well. But without that mentor, Camille Saint-Saëns, he would not have become the composer he was. That's pretty clear. He also composed an elegy.
Yeah, I think actually it's probably the most famous composition named elegy.
Yeah, that's true.
Of all the elegies,
yeah,
his is the most famous elegy.
That's true. That's true.
And there's a good reason for it, because it is absolutely gorgeous. So let's listen to it.
Yeah. The second piece is actually one movement of a suite called Péléas et Mélisande, an incidental music, meaning it's accompanying music to a play by a Belgian playwright, Maurice Maeterlinck. And the name may be familiar to you because Debussy actually quite at the same time composed an opera of this Péléas et Mélisande, whereas Fauré only composed, so to say, only the incidental music. And the story is briefly also the story is actually elegiac in that way, because it's Mélisande is a woman who is married to a man named Golo, but then she falls in love with the brother of this man, and of course the story can only end tragically. So both the lovers die in the end. And so the movement we are going to play for you, or to present to you, is the last one in this suite, the La Mort de Mélisande, the death of Mélisande.
Yeah, which was actually played in Fauré's on funeral.
Oh, okay, didn't know that.
Know that. So again, a very moving piece. So let's listen to that as well. we're going to finish with two pieces, kind of unrelated to. I mean, there's a lot of parallels between Elgar and Fauré, but now we're going back in time to the great masters of the musical canon, each with an interesting take, by us as to how they are elegies, right? And the first one is a piece that Bach wrote early on in his career, very different than anything else he ever wrote, frankly. It's called the Capriccio on the Departure of My Beloved Brother, and it's the only piece that Bach wrote, or at least that we know about, that is programmatic. It tells a story.
Yeah, so in that explicit way,
yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. Actually, it's completely un-Bachian, so to say.
Right. I mean, the style is un-Bachian. The fact that it's a programmatic piece. It's a very kind of sui generis piece. A lot of the scholars actually think that he wrote it for his brother Johann Jacob.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
When Johann Jacob was offered a position in the Swedish court, and he was moving to Sweden, which I guess in that time, moving to Sweden was almost like dying, right? It was like,
yeah.
It was considered true. Like going to the end of the world, right? And the third movement is called the Friend's Lament, which is designed to evoke the lament of this beloved brother's departure, and even though it's about his departure, not death, it's certainly elegiac in nature, and it's a very moving piano piece. So here it is.
Our last composer is one of the all-time great ones. So Ludwig van Beethoven. And the piece is the Third Symphony. So also a very famous one. And out of the Third Symphony, the second movement, a funeral march, which perfectly fits into today's program. And maybe you want to say something, but before in general, what I always think very important when listening to Beethoven or thinking of him is that, in particular, in maybe dark times like these, he is already a comfort because he always believed in mankind. I mean, the most famous expression of it is, of course, the Ninth Symphony, the final chorus with the ode to joy. All men become brothers. But I think, as difficult a person Beethoven might have been in daily life, but he never stopped believing in the good qualities of humankind. And I think his example also may serve us well in these times.
Yes, for sure. And the Third Symphony, the Eroica, just to put some context, is one of the most important pieces of all time, most consequential ones, because I don't think the world had ever seen or heard anything like it, both in terms of the scope of it, It was massive. It was revolutionary. Even at the beginning, it was awe-inspiring. It was, people would, were in awe of it, and it really marked very clearly the move from the classical period to the Romantic period, and therefore it's one of the most important pieces of music historically ever written. And originally he was going to dedicate it to Napoleon. He was a big admirer of Napoleon.
Only Napoleon the Republican.
Yes, correct. In his earlier days, when he was, consul, and he thought that here's some enlightened guy who's gonna, bring the world into a more egalitarian and more just world. Until he declared himself emperor, and then he was one despot placing another despot, and he was so enraged by that he literally erased.
There is still there is a hole in the title page of the autograph because he was so furious erasing it.
Yeah, which is incredible, right? Like that survived, and it's very clear. And so we're going to focus on the second movement, and the second movement is dubbed a funeral march, but I think it's beyond a funeral march. I think is a really deep expression of grief and remembrance and commemoration. And one accepted reason is or motivation for this is the Napoleonic Wars, particularly the Napoleon's war against Austria and the bombardment of Vienna while he was a resident of Vienna. And so I think in many ways it's not just a funeral march; it's an elegy for pre-war times and commemoration of the many people who died in that war. So hope you agree with us when you listen to it. And so here's the beginning of the third of the second movement. Sorry.
Thank you for having stayed with us again in a sixth episode, and we very much hope that our choice of music and this little talk has been able to give you some distraction maybe from other things and some comfort as well.
Thank you all, and we'll see you again.
Bye.